Hi, Tracy.
Hey there. Looks like everything's working right. Got shareability.
Yeah,
Can hear you. All is well.
all's good.
All right. I'll give folks a minute or two to get in, and then we'll get started.
TikTok, the time.
We're a minute after, so I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Excited to have Jeff Silva with us today from the UiPath MVP team. It's always nice to hear how other folks have implemented the platform. And so Jeff had a really cool use case that I thought all of us would benefit from hearing about. And so wanted to dig into that. And as you guys have questions, I believe everyone should have the ability to unmute themselves and speak up. I'll keep an eye out on the chat as well, but feel free to place questions there as he's going through the presentation. Take it away, Jeff.
Perfect. Thank you, Tracy. So yes, welcome everybody. As Tracy said, I am an MVP for UiPath for the last 2 years. I've been working for First Citizens for about 16 years and in the banking industry for 25. 8 of those last years have been on automation. And when I joined the MVP program, one of the questions that I was asked was which area that I wanted to focus on. And my answer was UiPath Apps. To me, I always felt like it's one of those parts of the platform that is sometimes underutilized, even though it is utilized. But what I mean is into its full potential. So I already had some ideas. We ended up in the use case that we're going to talk about today is a collection system that we build for our organization. And it really just to showcase that you can build more robust, more involved apps, both internally and for your external customers with this platform. It is a low-code platform. We're going to talk a little bit about what those advantages of those brings, just in contrast with traditional, development of software. And it is part of the entire UiPath platform. So you not only have this low-code functionality, but you also get to bring in everything else that UiPath has to offer, which is really the icing on the cake. I guess the big question that I wanted to solve before we move forward to the actual use cases is a little bit of, why develop our own apps internally and not just use regular, I'm going to call it regular automation, especially now with more advanced regular automation, which would be the agentic. And I think the difference to me is it boils down to business process. Before we did automation 8 years ago, we started as a process improvement department and started cataloging a lot of our systems. And in being in the banking industry, we kind of have like a centralized, system design. We have our core banking system and all these applications around it that connect to the core. Some industries are a little bit different, are less centralized. But in the case of the banking system, pretty much everything talks to the core, either to get information from, send it to, or both. And what we found is that we had over 140 systems that did this kind of relationship, and all of our processes was basically managing how the systems capabilities were and what the limitations are. And then what was left out over was just the processes that we kept as manual processes, basically, outside of the systems. And what we realize is that there's a lot of processes, those regular automations that we have built and we are building still, are usually targeting those kind of processes. But those processes are kind of like the trees for the forest kind of concept, right? It's things that might be influenced or might be impacted by the system. Maybe the system requires you to do certain steps that you don't necessarily need to do in your process or your business rules. So that kind of convoluted kind of makes the system being put in focus and being the question. And the solution of using UiPath codes is really to try to replace that and really try to build and focus on an application that works for your processes rather than your processes working for your applications, if you want to see it that way. Move over here. So collection system. So the first question that I wanted to answer here is, why collection system? Why not, out of those 140 applications, that's the best one you could come up with? And I think the answer was really kind of a need and an urgency in the system, because we did had an X amount of time before the system was going to be replaced and or contract renegotiated or an RFP be put out. So we kind of either we're going to do something or we're not. And we weren't happy with the system. I think collections is a particular area in the banking where there's not a lot of options out there, to be honest. If you ask any person that's been doing collections for a long time and ask them to name 3 collection systems, they probably will have a hard time coming up with a second or a third. So really, it's not like we can just create and change vendors, create an RFP and change a vendor, because the options are not really all necessarily that great. And really, the idea is we don't want to move towards another system that's going to probably have different problems, but problems nonetheless. So that was one of them. And then just generally speaking, it wasn't satisfying some of our business needs. So we just wanted to kind of build or get something that would be more aligned with what we actually need. And generally speaking, for UiPath low code applications of sort of this size or this kind of construct is, they're a little bit different than traditional automations, even the unattended or versus the attended ones. Because it is designed more for human initiated kind of automation, if you will. Collections similar to contact center solutions or even front end, like for us, retail banking kind of solutions are kind of designed to have a user interact with a member live in a direct way and in a specialized way. So at the end of the day, this kind of defines that. Like if you think of this outside of, oh, this is a system, this is an application, or this is not, it's just simply a process that is going to be, executing functions, in this case with our core banking system. But at the end of the day, it's human initiated versus then having a schedule to have a robot kind of run behind the scenes. But it also puts that power into to the user. So theoretically, and I'll use the banking system as an example, any area where you have that kind of need to centralize and simplify those processes, where you're taking all that excess processing from because the system requires me to type mindset, then you can utilize it anywhere. Now, if I was to go to, say, a loan operations department or deposit operations, there's complexity there. So many, I wouldn't build one app for that. You might need to conceptualize around your processes, your end-to-end processes, like we did here. Try to start with the beginning of the collections when the loan goes late until the loan basically becomes current. This is our process, this is our end-to-end, and this is where we're going to focus our application around. So moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about the problems we were trying to solve here. Now, some of these problems are existent and pretty much everywhere else in other applications, but I wanted to highlight specific problems that we had that we wanted to solve. So obviously, we want to streamline the collection process. We want to make it simpler for us, and we wanted to do it in a way that we focus on the user experience. And this is kind of I want to say this is really what is at the difference here between traditional development and this one. Every software development says they focus on user experience, but they don't. They have a process in mind and they create that process, and then your user experience is defined around that process. Here, we're not taking that approach. We are going to connect with a user to get their feedback and to get it. We've had to, since the process of discovery to building the first prototype, if you will, to the beta and the alpha versions for testing. We've done significant changes on the UX based on that feedback that we got. It doesn't come all at once. It doesn't come in one conversation. It's a series of different things that you do. For anybody that might want to see how user experience in focus groups especially are done, I would recommend signing up for any insider, product development that UiPath does. I've learned a lot from being part of their focus groups over the years. And it really, I think, helped drive some of that user experience to whatever degree, because we're never perfect. We're never going to be 100%. But having that open line communication with the user is very important still to this day. And always keeping an open mind too, that you might have to redesign a feature or two over time because, now that they've used the product for a certain period of time, they might have other ideas of how that can make it easy for them. So that's just generally talking about what does it mean to streamline that collection process. It's really not what I think it's best for them, but the end user telling me what that looks like and how that feels. And also one side note to that whole conversation is I think when you give the business processes, the subject matter experts that know the processes and how the processes operate, and you ask them to give them feedback, their tendency is to always go towards, well, give me what I have, maybe change this, and this, but give me what I have. And that's not what you want to do. So it takes some time to kind of build that open mindset and creative mindset with the user to actually start seeing what technology can do for them. And that's when the real magic starts coming in with those ideas and that feedback. And moving on, so real-time problem is an issue that we have with a lot of applications, and I want to say that in the banking industry, and I'm sure some institutions might be different than others, but a lot of them they integrate, and this collection system was certainly one good example for that. There's an extract that goes to the collection system, and just overnight, sometime throughout the day, that data is already like hours old, a day old. Something happens to that file. For a second, I lost myself. I don't know what happened, but I'm back. If something happens to that process the next day, you be dealing with 2-day-old data. So we really wanted to get that real time and near real time, whenever real time is not possible, data access to the process. We also wanted to focus a little bit more on collaboration. I think a lot of times systems focus a lot on the one user that's going to use the system, and they forget that the user is part of a team. And in the case of the collection system, the cycle of that end-to-end process could take days, weeks, even months, depending on how it goes from one end to the other. And a lot of different collectors are going to work through that one account. So you need to make sure that you have a system that helps pass on the knowledge of what was done before and what needs to be done next and that kind of stuff. So basically, just generally speaking, just increase that collaboration or make a system that is more collaborative to the user or users. The other thing is a lot of these systems that kind of just have their own, like, this is what we offer. You give me these 10 data points, 100 data points, whatever it is, and this is what our system needs. When you need additional complementary data, which happens a lot of times and certainly happens with the collections, that data is stored in, now you have to access other systems where that data is stored, and you end up creating that convoluted. I always joke when somebody asks you to be put on hold because they have to go do something, it's usually because they have to interact with a lot of systems to get that information and figure out what they need to do next and then answer the phone call. And we don't want that to happen, right? We also wanted to consolidate everything all into one single workspace. I think some of the other collection systems that we had seen and used in the past kind of tried to do that concept, but didn't really deliver it very well. So we tried to make sure that we delivered on that for the end user. So in general, obviously, we wanted to streamline all functionality and reduce the time to complete the actions that are taken on a daily basis. Now, UiPath Apps, low code, we already mentioned about that. Why low code is so different than traditional programming is because it's easy to develop. I think it's probably one of the easiest parts. It's easy to maintain, to find, the issues through our alpha testing, but more importantly through our beta testing, because once we created the beta testing team, we pretty much had every user of the system helping us test the system. More oddity issues were coming up from time to time, and a lot of times it was just simple stuff, things that weren't part of our test cases and existed with maybe a handful of loans. But once we found it, now we are on the mission to find what the issue is and solve it, and then publish a fix. And that's where low code really shines, because it allows you to do that. Of course, some architectural decisions and solution design really comes in to help with that as well. But the low code aspect really helps on that whole process. It's also easy to maintain from a perspective of continuity for the future, because it's low code. It's very easy to teach. Anybody can learn. I know some folks on the team itself have shown interest in learning it, and this is something that you don't need a computer science engineering degree to work with, right? It is designed. Low code is designed for be closer to the business user that actually deals with the processes, right? Also, one thing that I've noticed is, in designing of systems, we always talk about, designing and prototyping. And I found that UiPath itself becomes my prototype tool. I don't really need to spin off. If I want to redesign a feature or do something else, I don't need to spin up a whole other system to try to do a mock-up of that or a prototype of that. I can just, copy the current version of the app and just play with to try to make it work and see how well it works and how well it doesn't. And then I can just bring it back to my mainstream. So things like that makes it a lot easier. The fact that UiPath Apps is a cloud or web-based progressive web app is great. One, you don't have to worry about systems. If you're going to run this in a Mac or if you're going to run this on Windows, it's system agnostic, and you just have a browser, internet access, you're good to go. Being a progressive app also allows you to containerize it in a sense. You can even deploy it as an app on your desktop, on your start button. We actually use a version of that directly from our UiPath assistant, since they have some attended automation that goes along with it. But again, it can be containerized. It's very easy to update too. When you do updates, it's very streamlined. That's one of the purposes of the benefits of PWAs. The other thing too, and this is particularly obviously to UiPath's platform, is UiPath, you're already having authentication as part of your platform. So you don't have to reinvent. As a software developer, you have to figure out all those little pieces, how authentication works. Authentication is huge because it involves security. So here you already have a platform that you already vetted and you already worked with. You already do your due diligence on, and so on and so forth. So it works. It's secure. So your app is going to work without authentication. And for us, we actually had an added bonus, which is because we use our Active Directory integrated to our authentication with UiPath. So all the user groups from AD kind of follow through. So I'm able to use that if I want to create authorization, in the sense that I can say only managers can do this function. I now can just target the AD groups that is coming from our AD to basically say, this is a manager, allow them to do this, which is, again, something that simplifies your development in itself. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, if you will. The fact that it interacts with the entire ecosystem of UiPath is amazing. I think of document understanding. There's a lot of data extraction from documents in banking, and that is a very specialized system that usually any system that uses that either tries to do it in a more simplistic, less accurate way, or buy some other functionality that brings into their app that we absolutely are paying for it. But we might be paying it in 3 or 4 or 5 different systems if they're using that capability. Here, you don't. You already have it. It's part of your UiPath, platform. And everything else that comes with it. That was just an example that I wanted to use. Agentic automation, I think, is actually another great example, which this app does not use yet, but it is something that we're already starting to build some business cases of how that can integrate into this app and some of the things that it can do for the agents using the agentic component. As far as deployment is relatively easy. When you deploy the app for the first time, probably took less than 10 minutes. To do an update takes less than 2 minutes. And once I do the update, I just need to tell the user, just refresh your browser, close it, and reopen if you're using the PWA app, and it's good to go. So those things make it really easy. Also, if you did a deployment and something went wrong that you weren't planning or you didn't test it to, very easy to deploy it, back to the older version so you can work on the fix. So that does help a lot, and not having to figure out, and again, not having that technical need over that knowledge to actually develop to that. Now let's move into the actual architecture and the solution design of this new collection system that we're going to be demoing in a second. First of all, here's some wireframes, the original wireframes I think that we did from the beginning. So after our discovery and kind of when we understood what was that the user was going to need and see when coming to this application, we kind of conceptualized these two screens. The one on the left is your landing page where they will come into the app, which basically gives you a queue, as we call it, which is basically your accounts that are linked, right? And on top, you have a search functionality that allows you to search for somebody. In case you employ somebody, hey, they got laid off, I need to figure out what my options are, because I need to make sure before things get normalized, I need to make sure my mortgage is up to date, that kind of stuff. Now I need to search it because he's not late technically, so you need to find the user, so you need to be able to search for it. On the right, you have a screen which by now is completely different than this original wireframe. But this is supposed to be our single workspace to allow all the users to use and work that account. And we'll see those in a second. Of course, this is talking about how the system will look like and how it will function, but we need to understand is how things are going to work on the back end. And some of the architectural barriers we had or identified is, first of all, we wanted to use our core banking API. That was part of our strategy to bring that real-time and near real-time connectivity. Unfortunately for us, we wanted to use integrated services because that's just part of the platform. It makes the process so much easier to connect and to work with. But it used a kind of SOAP, I call it custom SOAP API, because it really doesn't follow any of the custom standards that integrated services would use. So we ended up creating a solution for that, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other barrier is this is a limited functions, is designed mostly for systems integration, not necessarily for an end user kind of functionality. So there were some calls that we would need that didn't exist in the API, and we needed to solve that. And the last two options basically is just functions that existed with other systems, as you see, and usually that's also one of the problems with standalone applications is they don't really talk to in this case, it didn't even talk to our core directly, never mind to other auxiliary systems. So we needed to figure out what functionality we wanted to bring in, which systems we wanted to bridge, and obviously we want to bring as many as humanly possible. And then functionality that we could see by discovery that did not exist in any system, but that now we needed to build from scratch in UiPath in our app. So how do we solve some of these problems? Well, very simply, we actually used probably the hardest one was our SOAP API problem. We actually built a cross-platform C# library that just dealt with the oddities and the way of working of this SOAP API. We containerized it there. It just handled the authentication piece. It handled the creation of the requests and parsing and basically understanding the responses and putting that data in available to us for us to use. Once we did that, we were able to create a UiPath coded library that ingested all these API calls, and now we're able to customize it a bit more for what we're going to be using, not just on our app, but potentially for any other workflow that could use our core's API. And that just basically makes it reusable and drag and drop into any of our processes, right? Again, the low code. Right? For the limitations on the APIs, we realized that most of this was basically read requests, and we had access to live databases. So we just, again, couldn't containerize that logic in activities that we could just drag and drop into our system with some arguments to parameterize, and we use that in conjunction with the API to solve some of those problems. As far as the functions for the systems and the functions that weren't supported, we're basically leverage UiPath's platform to do that. And this is where earlier I was saying that one of the advantages of UiPath Apps is using that entire platform that has a lot of tools for you to use. And last but not least, here's a little just generic base architecture of the system. We had a data service from Data Fabric that we used to build our queues, and an unattended process that we refer to as our queue builder. And the queue builder just runs on the schedule, so it creates that near real-time updates. It basically looks for things like, has the member made a payment, has the payment got reversed, has the loan paid off, those kind of things that could impact if a loan should be on the queue or not. And just refreshes this every 30 minutes between working hours. The other process is also an attended process, and that's the entity search, because we have a lot of search capabilities that we added to it, and some of them use API, some of them use SQL extraction. So it was easier to just build it on an attended process. And everything else works as an attended process that runs right on the machine of the user that is running the application. And with that, we're going to move into a little show and tell. So this is
Jeff, you do have a
Sure.
Yep. So the question is from you. It says, when UiPath Apps consumes the data from our database, is it extracting all that data from the source such that there is no data persistent in the UiPath cloud, or does the data get stored within the UiPath ecosystem?
In our case, it does not. We are using direct connections, so the data source is configured on the unattended robot. And one of the reasons why we also use the unattended robot was for that reason. So, well, not necessarily for that reason, but so it's going to simplify that connection and how the connection accesses the databases. Also, that database that we are using is in our system. So no, it does not even go into the cloud. If you're using Data Fabric, you do have the ability to connect that to a database in your system, as long as that database can be accessed from the cloud. But again, that would be a decision on your end to do. So yeah, very, very good question. Thank you. Perfect. All right, so here's basically how it looks. It looks similar, but obviously a little bit more cleaner. We have our queue system. Obviously, this is test. And Tracy, this being a Florida chapter, I decided to use a Disney theme here with Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and whatnot. So hopefully it's okay. So that's the queue. This is a static queue for testing purposes only. Obviously, there's no, you don't want to do any VS, any PPI information out there. The top part still remains the same for searching capabilities. We're not going to be demonstrating it here. Just going to demonstrate is the ability to validate and kind of filter some of these that exist here. Like if I want to search for a social, per my API requirements, I need to provide at least a partial name of the person before I'm able to search. So you can see that the search button was deactivated until I'm able to comply with the functionality. You also have toolkits that allows you to provide that information to the user whenever some validations are needed. As far as the queue filters, this is obviously just for loans for testing, but in real production, there would be hundreds, if not thousands of loans. So it would be inconceivable to just have to work out of that one queue. So we've created them and segregated them based on the needs of the business and how they usually work them. I'll use the repossession here as an example because the repossession is a very specific process. Obviously, this is like late, delinquency of a loan that needs to go into repossession status, and there's several different stages for that repossession to actually exist. Over here on the side, what you get to see is a little bit of the other features that we did. Like auctions is part of the letters that we generate that get sent sometimes to third parties, auctions for cars being one of them. So instead of the user inputting these addresses every single time, we just create a simple data service and a little dialog box so we can keep maintaining to add any future auctions that we might use, and that makes it easy to generate letters. Generating letters is actually a big component of the collections process because it's part of the compliance piece. So we had to really like work out not only just the functionality, but that user experience with them. And that's where these print queues come in, which we'll see more towards the end, that kind of show you how they would deal with once you're done printing. Before I go deeper into the application, just wanted to kind of show a little bit of what the inside of this looks like, especially for those that haven't seen. App Studio is very simple, is very, again, low code, very drag and drop kind of functionality. You have all your options here for each of the options, buttons, etc. that you have. You have every time you see the lightning, that's code that exists behind that's creating some functionality into the system. All the pages are created here. Some pages are those 2 pages that we talked about. Others are complementary pages, like these find member and find organization is the tables that populate here when we're searching for a member. Everything looks here all at once, which you do have to organize. So you have to have some sort of organizational schema to keep you, obviously conformed with what you're developing. Here's is the other page that we'll be seeing in a second that has a lot more information, a lot more pages. Some naming convention can help you keep it organized and together. One thing to note here is we are actually using the Visual Basic version of UiPaths, which is kind of like UiPath Apps 2.0. There is already a 3.0, I'm going to call it. They're not numbered in that way, but it's the version that uses the Web Studio, which has a few more nice capabilities here, especially to organize pages and variables and things like that. You can create folders and organize them there that way, which does help a lot. And over here, you can see some of the dialog boxes that we have. You'll see them live in the system, but again, same concept. You can create and design them in any way you want, and just add the functionality that you will to the events of each button. Down here, you get to see some of the processes that we've created that deals with the API and in the SQL databases and any other system that we would integrate here with the system, as well as storage buckets. Now, storage buckets, we use it mostly for the print queue functionality. We have the templates that stores the documents in there, and then the print queues themselves that are segregated per letter. We also have some data fabric entities that were created either to fill information into the screens, some of them like the lockout types and node classes and subclasses, but others like the queues and the queue test and special ones and the notepad that we'll be showing later. I'm actually gonna show the auction one because it's very simple just to see how the display here. You can see all the fields that were created for that data table. So it's basically having a database at your fingerprints, which you also can your fingertips that you can also use throughout all your processes and your apps. And of course, here there's a series of variables that are used in the process that actually control what things are, what gets shown, what data gets displayed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, just a little, kind of like drive through on the back end stuff. So I'm just looking here at some of the questions. Absolutely, using data fabric does add value to the process. As we just demonstrated some of the tables that we created for this process. And basically for every functionality that we didn't have a system to, that's where the advantage of using the UiPath platform, data fabric, and the data services as an example really help. I'm trying to understand the last question, Payu. Is that Visual Studio connected directly with our own data sources?
Feel free to come off mute, and it allows you. I think it's supposed to allow you to explain a little bit further, Pew.
And we can circle back if you want to. I see you're unmuted.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, perfect. You already answered.
Oh,
To
okay.
know more details about using the data fabric. That's all.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Just want to make sure I didn't miss any questions. All right, so let's find Mickey Mouse here. He seems to be delinquent right now, so bad Mickey. So one thing to note here while we're loading the screen is we're obviously working on a development stage of the app. It runs slightly slower than what you would expect in production, and what it does work in production. Obviously, once you deploy it, you're compiling the application, you streamlining in part of that compilation process to really make the code efficient. So the functionality works much faster in the actual deployed process. A case in point was we designed these node systems here behind the scene. And of course, again, this is a test site, so only has 3 nodes. A true production account might have hundreds of nodes. So I was kind of afraid in the effect that I was seeing in development is that it was taking a few seconds to actually load all the nodes just from the first screen. So I was concerned, but when we deployed it, we saw it's instantly and it shows up right away, so that we don't see that lag. I just wanted to kind of explain that a little bit. So here's how we would see in this case, this person has a warning. These are things that are placed on the account, sometimes by other departments for other reasons, but sometimes by the collection team as well, to kind of highlight something. And here in this case, it's just trying to tell that this is part of a veteran account that has some special handling. And it's also accessed through the other screen on the top. So first thing that I wanted to show is basically the functionality of the data that's being brought in and how we selected to bring this in. This is really kind of like a compilation of all the data, and we have this one particular process we call get details that has all the logic and how to take this data, what is taking from the APIs, what is taking from databases and something and stuff like that, and then compiling it all together in a way that we can see it. I'm going to move here to the emails just so you can kind of see. So everything is basically linked together through our app to make it dynamic. So if I change our borrower, it changes their phone number, it changes their emails, addresses, and so on and so forth. The same thing happens down here if you have multiple accounts, which in this case it's only one. But if you had more than one, you would have the ability to change to the other account so you can kind of see what's going on. As a matter of fact, you do not. Minnie has 1 account. Mickey has 2. But this is the kind of interactivity. Once you get the data, kind of centralized and created and structured for your app, you can do those kind of things. The other thing too that I wanted to show is basically how we organize. This actually was relatively small because there wasn't a lot of borrower information, but with the feedback used from the team, we realized that really they care more about the notes than necessarily just some of this other information, and they wanted this to be bigger. That this information down here is just kind of used throughout the conversation and stuff, and that we had, as you can see here, some known details, which by the way, you cannot scroll. This is designed to be like your single workspace, but you can expand it. And at that point, you can scroll down and now load that information, which also helps not having to load the entire screen all at once. So again, some just think about while you're building your applications, and if you're trying to focus on these single workspaces to make sure that you're not overwhelming, you're making everything slower. But then you have all the functionality here. And all this additional information, including transactions, which again, being a test account, this only has a disbursement that was done. And by the way, for those that might be in banking, you might be wondering, how can we do this? Well, we obviously have a test site that is actually segregated from our production, so we can able to do this stuff and stage it. It's also kind of helpful for development purposes because it's certain things you don't want to do in production. As you're testing and developing and stuff like that. So we build the app in that way where I can define if I'm using our test instance or if I'm using the live production one. But again, just to kind of show and tell that a little bit more, I'm going to move here up a little bit. This is actually an integration that we build. So all of our documents go to a cold storage. Again, another third-party application. And what we actually did is have to authenticate again. If we haven't used the application in a while, you need to re-authenticate yourself, which is very standard. If I was accessing this application separately, the same thing would happen. But once you authenticate, I believe it's for an hour, it just leaves you logged in. So if you're working every day, you might not get these authentications that often. But here it is. They actually pull up. Obviously, this is a test site. The only document in here is a picture of Mickey. But it just took you from one application to the other seamlessly by passing the information. Normally, you would have to log in manually. Open the application manually and then search the loan yourself. Here, we're able to just, in a very simple way, just create an icon that can just go back and launch the app. As you can see now, I don't need to log in, and makes the process much easier to access these other systems. From a collaboration perspective, we kind of needed a space. Like, we have notes here, but we kind of needed a space where they need to leave comments that are temporarily things that are happening on the current cycle of the repossession process that can be edited, that can be added, that can be deleted. So we just use Data Fabric as well to build a simple table with this dialog box that allows us to just simply go in here and create a new note, save if we decide we want to edit this other note to, I'm sorry, this actually delete, to add something else to it. We can do that and keep this going through the process. So the next time either I or somebody else goes into this loan, they get to see the updates that happen to this during this cycle. So that was part of the new functionality. We also added this features here because we originally were using your grids for this, but based on the needs and the feedback from the users, the grid wasn't satisfy some of their needs. So we kind of redid it as a custom list. We reorganized it, kind of displaying things a little bit differently for them, bringing in some additional fields as well. Again, all part of that feedback to recapture. But one of the things that we lost is the ability to search for things. But we added the ability to filter out the collection notes from the regular notes with a simple checkbox on the side, which kind of simplifies the process. And one more thing, actually two more things to show before we can open up for more questions and answers. So this is our action. This is basically the bread and butter of what a collector will do in the system. This is, again, is something that we kind of brought several components together into this one screen to simplify and streamline the process. But very simply put, you're going to select a note to document what you just did, what happened. And then you have all these options. You can add a tickler. A tickler means that there will be a follow-up happening later. You can add warnings to the account or the person, or lock out the account. And all you have to do is just select the options that you want. Once you click submit, you'll perform all the actions you have. Obviously, in real-world scenarios, you wouldn't be placing all 4 of these actions. Most likely, you'd just be putting a note in a tickler. In some other rare cases, you might put a note, a tickler, and a warning, something to that effect. Now, one thing that will be coming up on our next sprint is the note templates. We've been able to identify about 20-something cases where we can define what notes and what needs to be written out of the notes. What kind of action do we need? Do we need a tickler? Do we need a warning? Do we need a lockout? And what goes into those things? And also, which these 2 functions currently are still disabled, is what kind of letter. Usually these actions require some compliant letter to be printed and sent out to the member. So that's our goal for next sprint, is going to be to deliver this list of action templates, probably more so than notes, because it has everything and just is able to pre-fill. So again, further streamlining the process that we have here today. This is already something that we talked a lot with our team, and that they find that it's amazing not to have to. This, by the way, warnings and lockouts had to be a ticket generated to our loan servicing department to do. So those kind of things added even additional complexity. It wasn't even just moving from one system to the other, is they didn't even have the ability to do it. So they had to have another team processing that functionality. So now they're able to do it all in one screen, in one place. And the same thing happened with removing lockouts and whatnot. So obviously we don't need to do that. So that is the action. The next part is probably the most evolved and had quite a few pieces here, is the ability to create letters. So today it's done manually, and obviously a manually function sometimes is required for special situations. But what we're doing here is really trying to define whatever happened. We need to set a letter. I'm going to pick this one just to demo a couple of different things. I'm going to tell it that I want to see the letter before it gets sent to the print queue because I want to verify that everything is fine, and I just want to print to make it so and to save us some time. What this does is actually it will recognize that that letter has some fields that does not exist in the data that we have available to us. These are very specifically to the process, and it's going to pop up with this dialog box. As you can see, it's still populating. I'm going to give it a second, and then I'm going to provide the data. And once I provide that data, then I'm able to continue to create the letter. Here's the example of the auctions. This is one of the reasons why I used the template, so we can kind of see how the functionality works and how easily you can build it into your system. The other thing too that you'll see probably just pop in here down in the bottom of my screen is going to be Word. We actually leverage Word to create our letters. It's kind of like why reinvent the wheel. We already have Word; it already exists. The user doesn't get to see it. We know it's there. We know it populates. Actually can bring it up because it's just minimized, and it's kind of like pre-filling our templates with the placeholders, and it's loading all the data in, checking to which data goes into this form and that kind of stuff for us. Once it's done with this process, is that it's going to close the letter and then do what I request them to do, which is open the letter up for me to verify and make edits if I need to. It should be in a second. Here it is. And of course, it opened it in the other screen, which I'm going to bring here now. So here's our letter again. We already had seen it. Normally, the user won't see this. I'm just going to do here a quick edit. I'm going to save it because that was kind of one of the requests. Is, sometimes there's things that we need to adjust to the letter that we need to do different to the letter. Great. We have it. We were able to do this. The moment I close this is that it's going to convert this into a PDF and then put it in the print queue. So again, it's doing all that functionality behind the scenes, so the user don't have to worry, but still offering the capability. Very simple because UiPath had extensive activities to work with Word, and we're just keeping things simple for us from a development standpoint, but also for the user, because updating letters come frequently from time to time as compliance changes, and it's most likely coming on a Word document that then it's easier to update the templates with. With that said, I'm going to just finish one last thing, which is showing the print queue functionality, because we just did a letter now. This is something that's done once a day, but it needs to be stored in the meanwhile and from that point in time forward for the next day. So here's our letter to Mickey Mouse, the print queue. Once I select the letter, I get the ability to print just that letter, to view the letter, which we'll do now. And here's our letter. We can see that the tests came through because it was all done locally with attended processes. And because we don't want this to be printed anywhere, or just stay here, we're going to delete our queue and it'll refresh it clean. But that's just a very simplistic overview of what the system will do. What I wanted you to take away from this is the ability to see the capabilities that UiPath Apps has to just build about any feature that you possibly would see in any higher code or traditional coding application. And even though you don't get to see all the things that happens behind the scenes with how the API interacts and things like that, it's there. If anybody here is from the banking industry, specifically from the CUCCN side or Fiserv DNA applications, and you're interested in getting information on the API library, I'm more than happy to share that with you and connect with you afterwards. CUCCN side is the core that we use, which is a twin of Fiserv's DNA, and they basically use the same API, infrastructure, if you will, and functionality is the same system essentially, with some modifications by each individual entity. But it's the API that we are using here, in a sense. With that said, anybody else has any questions? Anything that you would like to ask or see? Be glad to answer.
How much development time went into building this? It's impressive.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Well, it actually, the development time itself wasn't much. Considering that there's some features here that we had to redesign from scratch. Oh, almost from scratch. Again, based on that feedback, the discovery piece is really the one that took the longest time. We started this process around January, end of January, beginning of February, with the discoveries. We did job shadowing and kind of got together, looked through the documentation, explored the systems that were being used a little bit more, started building the development of the API, which honestly was, again, something that we had to deal with. Wasn't really with the app development piece. If that was using integrated services, we wouldn't have to deal with all that. That also took some time. But aside from that, actually building here in App Studio, it's very easy. I actually give you even a better example. Often enough, sometimes I get these requests that, oh, can you add this feature here or there? And I'll look at it and at the inside part, and I'll be like, yeah, I can just add a box here. I can add that button there that just calls this other process. And usually, if it's something that simple, I'm able to put that, implement it, deploy it, and just tell the user half an hour later, go ahead and refresh it. It's all set. And I say half an hour just because it doesn't really take that long time to do it. I remember the functionality on the loan to get transactions, which I won't spend the time to get there, was something that was requested. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, we kind of already have the transaction list on the API. So I just need to build a data table with all those transactions and put them in a way that I can easily display it and bring the feature. It was something that took me maybe a couple of hours to build. And boom, it was done. So again, it's the advantage of low-code functionality. It really doesn't take a lot for you to move things around. The same thing with redesigning a feature. It's not the end of the world. You're not going to be breaking a lot of things in order to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, very welcome, Richard. Absolutely, Matthew. I believe our contacts are shared here, but I can put them in the chat as well. Sure I spelled this right. Yeah, looks good. Very good. Anybody else? I have 9 minutes left. If anybody has any other questions.
Hi, Jeff. I have a question. Like, do we build this entire end-to-end UiPath apps through the orchestrator cloud, or do we use the Web Studio?
So we actually use the App Studio to build all the functionality. Of course, the attended processes were built in regular UiPath Studio, just because of all having custom activities to bring in. But yeah, it was all built within the App Studio. Absolutely.
All right. Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
Jeff, do you know much about how apps is licensed as far as users versus developers versus whatever?
Right. So I know a little bit, and I can tell for our use case, we're actually using attended licenses, which kind of simplifies things a little bit. Attended licenses are relatively cheaper, obviously, than a robot license because they're just working for that one user. They're named licenses. So when you deployed it, we had 8 users on this team. So 8 users are using license. We already had the licenses. For us, it was really no added cost to us. But depending on what your app is doing, like I said here, we are using some unattended processes as well as some attended processes will need attended licenses, but unattended are your already existing unattended processes. You just need to dedicate an attended robots to it. So moral of the story, that is it. The only question that I have, Tracy, to answer truthfully to that question is I don't know how it works for external applications. This being an internal application, I don't have that issue. I just had to decide that I wanted to use attended users to understand that I needed to get those licenses. But as far as I understand, there's no other licenses per se to build the apps and deploy them. But there need to be users in the system. So I don't know exactly how that works with external ones.
I'm curious if you guys were to build additional companion apps, if they'd be additional, if that would be an additional charge, or if it's really just the use
Nope.
of the app at all.
For this team, if we were to build additional companion apps or functionalities aside from this app, like another app to do something else, even if I'm using an attended or attended, they already have those licenses. There's no additional cost. Of course, there would be costs for other functionality on the platform, right? But nothing related to the app itself.
Sure.
The app is sort of part of the platform.
Got it. Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for Jeff?
Hi.
Oh, Jeff, one more question for the integration services. Like you mentioned earlier, we use the APIs and different integration services to call the external systems to collaborate with the app. But the thing is, how do we build those APIs? We do build the APIs through the orchestrator integration service to build the custom connectors, or
no, not for our core API. Unfortunately, we couldn't use that for a couple different reasons, but one of them is just the structure of how the API works. We are, it's actually in our backlog. It's not going to be for next sprint, but possibly to one in 2026. We want to integrate with our telephony, and that one we can use the integrated services for it, which we wish we could have used it for the core itself. But I had to build that completely separate. I actually build it in Visual Studio as a standard, C# cross-platform, library, and then I brought that into UiPath as a library that you can just import and use there to build your activities for your regular workflows. So it's kind of like, this is one of the reasons why I needed attended licenses, because a lot of these processes are running attended because it's faster. That's what attended is kind of for, is for the user that's there on the phone with a person. We needed to run it faster, and that's why I opted to use the attended licenses and run it in the attended processes. Again, limitation being one of those barriers that we identified earlier, which was that the API could not be used with the integrated services.
Yep, makes sense.
But most modern APIs, especially if they comply with Open API, can easily be integrated with the integration services.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think.
So thanks very much. I thought this was great. It was really nice to see hands-on, to see a really nice use of apps, which I think is definitely underused on the platform. And to hear that they've worked out a lot of the licensing issues that used to exist a while back. So really appreciate you stopping by and sharing with all of us. And I'm sure you guys can find Jeff on LinkedIn and within the UiPath community if you have further questions.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending, everybody.
Thank you.